Okay, so today I'm going to start off with something a little bit different. I'm going to start off with a story. In 1985, Coca Cola unveiled the new Coke product, and it was met with resounding disapproval, and the public outcry eventually led Coca Cola to abandon the new product and revert to Coca Cola Classic as the standard. And if you're around my age, you kind of remember this. And if you're from Gen X, then you definitely remember this, but I think it's time I ought to point out something else of note. Coca Cola changed their initial formula in 1974 from using sugar as a sweetener to using high fructose corn syrup as a cost cutting measure. You know, if you connect the dots, it could be speculated that Coca Cola was selling quote unquote new Coke without the label of new Coke for 11 years, unbeknownst to their entire customer base. And it wasn't until a marketing campaign was established behind it that there was public outcry because the 1974 change still resulted in high rankings in taste tests and favorable opinions in surveys. Listening audience, that story is why I'm cynical at heart and why I extol its virtues and know of at least three upsides to cynicism. What the heck am I talking about? Well, cynicism originally started as a school of thought based on the idea, and I'm going to warn you, this is a very esoteric reading of the philosophy, and it's that happiness comes from individual virtue, and it aimed for a rejection of conventional things that were meant to be superficial, like wealth or appearances, things of that nature. Now, this is a reference, I'm referencing the original Cynics with a capital C that came from ancient Greece. They were actually a group of philosophers. And when you look at that, it's easy to see how the definition morphed eventually over time. And just to be clear, the definition I'm using for the purposes of this video is a distrust of displays of sincerity and integrity. Now, this is obviously on my mind for a reason. I mean, at the time of me making this video, the United States is going through political changes, and there's an administration set to take power soon that, for better or worse, with many people, has a reputation of false promises and corruption and ineptitude. For sure, to me, that looks like a sign that maybe it's time to embrace cynicism. And I have three reasons why. I mean, I have more, but three is what I'm going to go through in this video. So bear with me. Number one, if you're truly cynical, then people in institutions can't really let you down or disappoint you. I mean, if you don't expect much or any good things from something, the worst case scenario is that you're pleasantly surprised. When you think about it, that's kind of a good thing. Nobody can ever go below your expectations because there's no room. There's no space there. And that will obviously lead to you not viewing them in the scope of disappointment. You expect anything from them, good or bad, which means you'll never be surprised unless it's good. And that sounds a lot better than heartbreak and despair over attaching yourself to something without it. Now, number two, cynicism also, in many ways, accounts for what some people like to call quote unquote brutal honesty. So inevitably, any kind of truth can't really deal that much damage to you. I mean, usually, if we're all being honest here, quote unquote brutal honesty is truly just meant to hurt someone psychologically. It's not just the truth, but it's framed in a negative way. But knowing that, you can prepare for the truth, you can absorb its impact, and you can adapt while coping with any circumstances. Now, from my observational window, I've seen this most prevalent in the world of sports, and they call that mental toughness. And I must tell you that as a real world application, it's pretty awesome. And third, cynicism obviously relies on logic. So it helps you to avoid making impulsive decisions when it's not appropriate, and there are times where it is not appropriate. I'm obviously an advocate for deductive reasoning. You can actually check out a video I did about deductive reasoning versus impulsive behavior. And when you have deductive reasoning, logic, and you couple that with a mental toughness and ability to absorb the truth, that often combines to make good citizens out of all of us. I mean, when we accept harsh but necessary truths and follow the actual clues to solve big and small problems, we often collectively do solve problems. There are many historical events that reflect this idea. The nearest to my memory is, you know, World War II, arguably the most significant war to anyone alive today. And it was because of a collective acceptance of logic and a collective acceptance that we needed to be mentally tough, that we endured that disaster and fought back fascism. Oh, the irony of history rearing its ugly head in the modern world and showing us why we ought to stare at that ugly head square in the eyes and not flinch. You see, look, all I know about the upsides of cynicism is that, well, metaphorically, it might be time as a nation to eat our Brussels sprouts. It it might not be the cake and ice cream that's impulsiveness and delusional thinking, because ultimately that's all about pleasure seeking, but we'll be healthier for it in the long run. And when it comes to that pleasure seeking, we can have our quote unquote dessert later on. I mean, look, right now, the people in charge don't know what you're going through if you're in the middle. And if you're below the middle, you definitely have reason to be concerned. And I'm just saying, your concern should manifest in the form of cynicism. Look at what they're doing, take it for what it is, and fight back truly in kind. I mean, right now, the powers that be are living in a land of make believe. So why not, as a collective voice, bring them into our shared reality using cynicism? The way I see it, it's not the only way I see it, but right now, from this angle, the way I see it, it is totally worth the trouble.